Now, the city of Neom, the reason that's interesting to me is it shows you how rapidly and how fast a city can be built, from in the desert in that part of the world. And that actually leads to the next bullet point.
Let's go there. Revelation 18, verse 10. Standing at a distance because of the fear of her torment, saying, Woe, woe, the great city Babylon, the strong city, for in 1 hour your judgment has come. So there's going to be a great city. We've gone through Revelation 18 before. Babylon is a world center, a Eurocentric world government made up of spirituality. It's a dwelling place for demons. Spirituality is there. We see the merchants, that's business, and we see the kings of the earth, that is government. So there's your three-legged stool: government, big business, and spirituality, which, of course, we've been saying for a long time is the communitarian three-legged stool of communitarianism, also promoted by the occultist Alice Bailey 100 years ago through her demon. So Babylon, I think, is going to be a legitimate place, a Eurocentric world government. How does all this fit with what's going on in Saudi Arabia and the desire for this city of Neom? How does that fit, you think, with the coming expansion of a Eurocentric world government out of Babylon?
Well, the first thing to understand is we think Babylon means Babylon.
Right.
Babylon is used 300 times in the Bible. It always means the same thing. It's a city in modern-day Iraq between the Euphrates and the Tigris. Why treat the book of Revelation, which is just summing up everything, differently? We are not replacement theologians. Replacement theologian substitutes the word church for Israel. Well, very sadly, Brandon, we got a bunch of people running around that are replacement theologians because they substitute the word Rome, for Babylon, and we don't think that can be done, hermeneutically. But the reason that city of Neom is so interesting is people forever, what I can remember, have said, oh, come on, Babylon can't mean Babylon. You can't expect a city of that worldwide significance to spring up overnight in the Middle East. Well, it's happening. It's happening in the Middle East. It's happening with Neom. You just ran the clip. It's also happening with the city of Dubai in the United Arab Emirates. There's some other cities that I mentioned in my book on Babylon in Saudi Arabia. And so why is it so far-fetched to believe that a city of worldwide significance, could emerge, between the Euphrates and the Tigris, when God's word over and over again tells us that that's exactly what's going to happen?
So tell me, what would have been the expansion of Babylon? Have you ever looked at a map and studied that? When Babylon the Great was, quote, was around, how far was its expansion?
Well, it was a city. It ruled over Babylonia, which is that larger area, between the Euphrates and the Tigris. I mean, it's called in Herodotus, I believe, or it's referred to as one of the great seven wonders of the ancient world. You have the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. You have a tremendous description of it in Daniel 4, where Nebuchadnezzar was very proud of it. And he said, is this not the great Babylon that I myself have created with my own power? And God dealt with him for 7 years, turned him into an animal or an animal-like intellect for 7 years. So it was obviously a city of great splendor. And its destruction at the hands of the Persians, Daniel chapter 5, was not even a cataclysm, and it wasn't even a battle. The Persians tunneled under the walls of the city of Babylon, and most of the Babylonians, Herodotus tells us, didn't even know they had been captured. So the great prophecies of Isaiah 13 and 14, Jeremiah 50 and 51, which talk about a cataclysmic destruction of Babylon on equal par with the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, those prophecies have never been fulfilled. And that's one of the reasons we believe if God means what he says and says what he means, Babylon has to be brought back to life, to be destroyed with the specific precision mentioned in those ancient prophecies. And so people say, oh, come on, a city like that couldn't emerge so fast. Well, look at Neom. Look at Dubai. Um, we're living in a time period when that type of argument won't hold any validity anymore.
Yeah. Does this look like this map right here I just pulled up? I found. I think the orange area obviously is supposed to be the Babylonian Empire, 606 to 536 BC, and it encompasses obviously what we know today is Israel, Jordan, part of Egypt, right up to the edge of part of Iran. It goes right on over to part of Turkey, Syria, of course, right down to part of Saudi Arabia, butting up against that, right around the Persian Gulf. Does that look, does that look like an accurate rendering of what would have been the Babylonian Empire geographical area?
Yeah, that's called Neo Babylonia, and it's what God said to Nebuchadnezzar. You, Daniel, God through Daniel, you are the head of gold. So there's going to be various empires that are going to trample down the Jewish people during the times of the Gentiles, beginning with the Babylonian captivity. But that was the empire that God allowed to come into existence to sort of inaugurate the times of the Gentiles. And ultimately, it's going to be replaced by a revived Rome. But that doesn't take away from the fact that the city of Babylon won't be, playing some kind of significant role in the end times. It's the woman riding the beast. The woman is the city of Babylon riding on top of the Antichrist with his worldwide, initially Eurocentric empire. Eventually, the Antichrist will become very jealous of the city of Babylon and will turn on her. And God is actually going to use that to fulfill his purposes for the destruction of Babylon in fulfillment of Isaiah, Jeremiah, Zechariah 5 in the seventh bowl judgment.
So do you believe that this Babylon, as described in Revelation 17:18, has to be actually in what we call Babylon today? Or do you believe it could take up some of the geographical area that we just showed on the map?
Well, I think the focus is not on a revival of Babylonia, but on the city of Babylon. And that's why it keeps saying city, 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 all the way through
So
those
you believe it's the actual geographical area that was Babylon in the Bible, that actual city where the Tower of Babel was?
Correct.
Yeah, and you and I are in agreement with that because it makes so much sense when you realize she's the mother of harlots. She's bringing all those religions back together. And we've got the United Nations, UNESCO, wanting to rebuild it. They have for a long time. In my book, The Coming Religious Reich, I'm quoting a couple Army War College professors saying we should move the UN there. We should move the United Nations to Babylon. It almost makes you wonder if something's going to happen. I always wondered if the United Nations would get fed up and leave the United States over Trump. But that building they're in is supposedly quite decrepit and not in good shape. And that was several years ago. I was hearing and listening to reports on how bad the condition of that building was. But you also have to wonder if there's been some kind of major terrorist attack or maybe a major cyber attack on America that causes the UN and its people to get up and get out of there.
Yeah, there's a lot of scenarios you can come up with. What I've heard from a lot of people is there's no room in that building for them to grow. They can't grow any direction unless they build upward. I guess they could try to do that. It is New York after all. But there's all these real estate, limitations put on them. And so, I think the time in history will come, when they will uproot. And as your book indicates with those Army War College professors, hey, let's, and also the late Henry Morris in his Revelation commentary. Henry Morris was an interesting guy. People think he was just a Genesis guy, but he also he had a huge interest in Bible prophecy, and he wrote commentary on Revelation, and he was saying the same thing. He says, Babylon connects the three major continents, and it would be an ideal place for a world capital. Yeah, it's absolutely fascinating. In fact, in that PowerPoint I sent you, there's a couple maps. And this is an article from the cradle.com that I learned about recently. It's published January 31st, so it's a very recent article. And they're talking about building a port type of arrangement there on the Persian Gulf, in Iraq.
Here we
And
go.
then
Let's show this, guys.
yeah, and then they're simultaneously talking about building a what they call a dry land route that sort of cuts from that port up through Iraq, and it also branches out into Syria and Turkey. And they're talking about how once this is built, it's going to be absolutely astounding. And there's some interesting maps there that you're pulling up. It's going to be absolutely astounding how this is going to cut down on the trade routes of different nations and businesses as they're exporting and importing, goods and commodities, and how this is going to materially impact and benefit Iraq. And once you read that, you say, oh my goodness, this is how the city of Babylon is going to become a port city, is going to exercise tremendous economic
we'll come back and have you finish that up because the music's making your voice break up. But fascinating map that has this dry canal going from the Persian Gulf all the way up to Turkey. The dry canal. I'll have you explain that when we come back. And then it has an international road. And when you look at the map and you go to the cradle.com or the cradle.co and you look at this, Baghdad is right in the middle of Iraq, Iran, Syria, Turkey. Wow. Iraq's two ambitious trade corridor projects present an opportunity for a beleaguered Baghdad to enhance its geopolitical status and establish economic independence. It's a brand new article. January 31st, 2023. Dr. Woods, this is a fascinating article you found because you and I both have been, in print, quite bold about the fact we believe there'll be a Eurocentric world government literally in Baghdad. I wrote that in my book, 500-page book, The Coming Religious Reich, before you and I ever knew each other. You were writing, we were saying and writing the same things, didn't even know each other, and now we're friends and we work together and we're still saying the same things. And this is fascinating because if you look at the map, it shows in the article, and I just linked it at the top of the page of worldviewreport.com for those who want to see it, this dry canal and then the international road. Can you describe the dry canal and the international road to our audience?
Yeah. And just real quick, just to give credit where credit is due, this was a church member, someone I've had on my show, she's a political activist.
Oh, yeah, I know who you're talking about, yeah.
Yeah, Tomalia Bench sent that to me. And to be honest with you, that's sometimes my best sources that I use on my show. It's, stuff people send me because I look at our shows as, there's other people out there that are the eyes and ears for us. And they will sometimes send me stuff that's just vintage material. So this is just such a case. And if I had, not published my book yet, I would have included this article, in my book. But basically what it's talking about is a dry canal from the port, which I think could very well, in the course of time, turn into a wet canal that's going to basically take goods and services through Iraq. It's going to basically cut down the distance. If you go to that second map, you'll see the distance that they have to go now. And you can see how this new route will significantly cut down on the distance of commodities and goods and services. And Iraq and the city of Babylon in particular will become very, very wealthy. So the reason this is significant is people have always said, a city like Babylon could never arise to the level of economic significance that the Bible predicts. Yes, it could. It could happen very, very quickly. In fact, it is happening as I speak. And people also say, well, there's no waterways there. Well, this is a foreseeable path whereby waterways and canals could be rebuilt in and near the city of Babylon, making it that port city that the Bible anticipates in the last days. The point of the matter is, if you give God or history enough time, history will catch up with the specifics of God's word, whether it be Sheba and Dedan with the Abraham Accords, or whether it be Babylon, a port city of great economic and political significance in the last days.
Here's what I wrote in my 2015 book on Babylon needing a port. I just had it here. Babylon needs a harbor. Revelation 18:17 through 19 has been used by some to say that Babylon needs a harbor. And since it does not have one, then the Bible is not literally referring to Babylon. Here's the passage. For in 1 hour such great riches came to nothing. Every shipmaster, all who travel by ship, sailors, and as many as trade on the sea, stood at a distance and cried out when they saw the smoke of her burning, saying, what is like this great city? They threw dust on their heads and cried out, weeping and wailing and saying, alas, alas, the great city in which all who had ships on the sea became rich by her wealth, for in 1 hour she is made desolate. Okay, that's the text. I go on to write, while Babylon does not have a harbor at the time, this book goes to press, that was 2015, does not mean that we'll never have a deep harbor. No, it doesn't mean that. More than 20 years ago, in 1991, it was reported that Iraq's President Saddam Hussein wanted a deep sea port. And I quote a source, it was unacceptable to Saddam that a country as great as Iraq did not have a long coastline. Over and over, he talked about the necessity of building a navy and becoming a seafaring power. Iraq's isolation from the sea was a cruel accident of history, he believed, and one that had to be rectified, a theme he continued to dwell on after his invasion of Kuwait. Okay? And then I quote Dan Hayden in his book, Iraq, in the Crosshairs of Destiny. And he talks about a deep water harbor being possible in Babylon. He writes, actually, the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers converge in southern Iraq and enter the Persian Gulf and Iraqi territory. The problem has been that Iran and Kuwait squeeze Iraq into a bottleneck at the mouth of the rivers, and Iraq's attempts to forge a harbor there have been thwarted by the hostile refusals of those two countries. But suppose international pressure were brought to bear upon Iran to allow Iraq across the Shat Arab waterway all the way to Basra, and cooperation could be coerced from Kuwait to open up the area around its little island of Buyan and Warba, I'm not sure I'm saying those names right. A commercial port and harbor for ships could become a reality for Babylon in a relatively short period of time. With modern dredging equipment, a deep channel waterway could be opened from the Persian Gulf all the way to Babylon. With its location on the Euphrates River, ships and sailors could indeed have access to this future queen of modern cities, the Antichrist ruler with his political and economic power and global influence could easily make that happen. So as you can see, a harbor in Babylon is not out of the question, end quote. Quoting Dan Hayden from my book, The Coming Religious Right, 2015. And here we are today, 2023, Dr. Woods. Pick it up.
Well, what's interesting is that article mentions how these new routes are going to actually benefit Iran and Turkey. So now the source you quoted indicates that Iran was an obstructionist. Well, now you have some information as to why Iran would be on board with this and loosen the obstruction. And then Turkey is going to benefit because the route ends in Syria and also in Turkey.